بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
ياسين والقرآن الحكيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, today we're going to be studying ayahs number 69 and 70. That leaves us with about 13, 14 ayahs to cover, so inshallah, we will get done before Ramadan's over. We still have a few days. I would have liked to have done more today, as I mentioned yesterday, but the topic and the theme and the subject of these ayat that we're going to be covering today is so detailed, and it requires just enough discussion where I didn't think we'd be able to practically do more than 2 ayat today, unless anybody's interested in staying for over an hour. So, and I didn't think so. So, inshallah, we'll go ahead and try to keep it to 2 ayat today, and tomorrow we'll make up for some lost ground, inshallah. From here, we're starting a new passage. And as I've mentioned before as well in this series that we've been doing of Yaseen throughout the month of Ramadan, the construct of every surah within the Quran is very beautiful. Surah Yaseen is very, very intricately constructed. And that's part of what makes this surah so special. And that's why a lot of virtues have been attached with the surah. And this also helps to lend to the power of the message of the surah as well. That the impact and the power and the message of the surah, part of that also comes from the very intricate structure of the surah. So we had a very detailed and a very comprehensive introduction to the surah, if you remember. We then had 3 main passages focusing on the 3 main themes of the surah. The first was prophethood, messengerhood, how the message is being delivered, and by means of who is it being delivered. The middle passage, which was the crux, the center of the surah, that was about Tawheed, oneness of Allah. And we talked about how even the crux of that was to develop the concept of gratitude, gratefulness within the human being. And then it finally ended with the third passage was focusing on the life of the hereafter, the fact that there is an afterlife, and that is teaching the human being about consequences of choices, decisions, actions, what we do. So what you make of the first 2 will determine your fate in the third. And now this final passage of the surah is a conclusion. So just like the introduction was unfolding these topics, the conclusion here will basically summarize what we've discussed within this surah so far. And so I kind of wanted to detail this conclusion. What's really beautiful about Surah Yaseen is that it pretty much concludes in the same way it opened. It closes up in the same way it opened. So the same issues that it touched on, the same things that it talked about when introducing the surah, and the topics and the themes of the surah, it ends up concluding by returning back to those same issues and topics and presenting conclusion on those same issues. For instance, Surah Yaseen opened by saying, "Wal Quran al-Hakim." It swore by the wisdom, the profound wisdom of the Quran, and how the Quran is bursting full and just overflowing with wisdom. Similarly, the end passage here will also talk about the power, the validity, and also the substance of the Quran. That the Quran isn't like poetry, but rather the Quran is something of substance. Because poetry lacks substance. If it has more substance, then it loses some style. When you try to gain style, you lose the substance. So that's the issue with poetry. But Quran is a book of substance. It's a discourse, a dialogue of substance. And that's the first and foremost thing. Then it also focuses on the same thing like the beginning of Surah Yaseen did. How the substance of the Quran in and of itself is the greatest evidence or proof for the validity of the messengerhood, the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That his greatest proof and evidence of being a messenger is the substance of the Quran. the wisdom of the Quran, the power and the message of the Quran. It then focuses on telling the Prophet ﷺ that only the person who is aware, it uses a very interesting term, is spiritually alive. Only that person who his decency is still intact is the person that will express any type of interest in the message that you are presenting. It then talks about, it refutes this idea of the Quran being poetry and the Prophet ﷺ being a poet. And it goes, like I mentioned, it goes into more detail about who will follow this message, who will believe in the Quran, and who will reject the Quran, and what their exact problem, what their situation is, why they are rejecting the Quran, and that the problem actually lies within themselves. They are depriving themselves. They are deprived in and of themselves. This has nothing to do with the message of the Quran. After making this point of the Quran being valid and the word of Allah, and the Messenger ﷺ being the presenter of the word of Allah, it's going to go back to focusing on some of the signs of the greatness of Allah that we can see all around us, and then it's going to remind us of the basis, the core of the surah that I have mentioned before, and that is shukr. That by looking around us, appreciating the greatness and the signs and the blessings of Allah all around us, we can actually start to become more grateful and more obedient slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So gratitude, gratefulness is very, very important. It's finally going to end by providing some consolation to the Prophet ﷺ. That because now the Prophet ﷺ, imagine what he's feeling at this time. The Quran is so powerful. He is presenting this powerful, word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that human beings, it is out of their reach, out of their grasp. It's something they could never copy or reproduce or imitate. Poetry doesn't even come close to the Quran. And then you have the signs of Allah all around you, making it obvious that you need to be grateful, thankful to Him, and worship Him, and be obedient to Him. But these people still disbelieve at the end of the day. And that causes frustration. In any decent, any normal human being, that's going to cause a certain level of frustration. What's wrong? Why don't these people believe? So Allah finally ends the surah by telling the Prophet ﷺ, don't worry about these people who continue to disbelieve, reject, deny, refuse the message. These people that continue to curse you and they continue to criticize you and your message and the Quran. Don't listen to these people. And Allah says something very interesting. And this is something we've already seen in the surah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ that these people have the audacity to talk ill of Allah Himself. These people are so blatantly disobedient, arrogant, and even stupid that they will speak inappropriately about Allah. Why are you shocked or surprised that they would disrespect you or speak inappropriately about you? These people have no humanity, no sensibility, no decency left within them. So leave them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah can handle them most appropriately. So this is sort of a recap of what we're going to see here in this last passage over the next few days. The first two ayat that we're going to study of this passage, the first one is Allah says, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ. Allah is talking about the Prophet ﷺ, and He says, we did not teach him. We did not teach him poetry. He's talking about the Prophet ﷺ. We did not teach him poetry. Now let me talk about just this first part. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is refuting the very obvious go-to criticism of the mushrikeen and of anybody who denied or refused to believe in the message of the Prophet ﷺ. And their easiest cop-out out of believing was, oh, this is just poetry. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, they say in Surah Al-Anbiya, بَلْ افْتَرَاهُ بَلْ هُوَ شَاعِرٌ. Oh, he just made this stuff up. The Quran, he just made it up. بَلْ هُوَ شَاعِرٌ. He's just a poet. That's what he does. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refutes this time and time again in the Quran. In Surah Al-Shu'ara, which I'll talk about in a little bit, He does it in probably the greatest detail, in a very intelligent and in a very comprehensive manner. Allah refutes this idea, but otherwise in the Quran, Surah Al-Haqqa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تُؤْمِنُونَ وَلَا بِقَوْلِ كَاهِنٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. These are not the words of a poet, these are not the words of a soothsayer or a magician. that these people, very few of these type of people, they believe, or do they ever really realize something? Do they ever wake up and realize what they're doing? They don't understand, because they don't want to understand. So Allah's first thing He refutes, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ شَيْئًا. We didn't teach him poetry. So the Prophet, this idea is being refuted that this is not poetry. Alright, I'll talk more about this in just a minute. So that's the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. One thing that's very interesting in how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ شَيْئًا. Notice Allah says, He didn't say that He does not speak poetry. He does not deliver you poetry. He says, we did not teach him poetry. Allah connects the source of the knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ. That if you want to call him a poet, then where would he learn poetry from? From Allah. Even if he knew poetry, he would have learned it from us, Allah says. But we didn't teach him poetry. Allah is making a very profound point. See, this is what happens when you pay attention to the exact words of the Quran. Allah is saying, we did not teach him poetry. Meaning what? The only source of knowledge, the only source of information for Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Allah Himself. Anything and everything he has comes from Allah. Comes directly from Allah. There's nothing else that he picks up from anywhere else. There's nothing else that he delivers to you from someone or something else. Everything that he has, everything that he speaks of is coming to him directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. That's the first thing. And this is very important because even though this is such an unacademic, unintelligent claim, because it shows that they're not even fully aware of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. There are historical, full accounts of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. It shows that these people aren't aware, but there are Orientalist, Western academic professors who try to undermine the credibility of the Prophet ﷺ and Islam and Quran by saying, oh, he ended up traveling around, learning these things, all these things that he talked about, the messengers of the past and the nations of the past. He actually traveled around and he learned all these things from all the rabbis and the priests and the monks and all the people that he found everywhere. He traveled around, picked up all this information from everywhere, and then basically kind of turned it into this presentation that he called the Quran, the Word of Allah. These are actual academic, or they claim to be academic, research papers presented by university professors in Western academic institutions. But what's very, very sad about that claim in and of itself is that they're not even fully aware of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. If they would sit down and just read the seerah, read the historical accounts of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, they would see that this is completely preposterous. That the life of the Prophet ﷺ has been recorded down to the minutest detail. We have it preserved. And so it's almost as if literally every moment of the Prophet ﷺ's life has been accounted for and is recorded. But the Quran itself is refuting this idea. This is a miracle of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that eventually somebody would bring these claims. That, oh, Muhammad just ended up learning these things from other people at his time. So what does Allah say? وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ شَيْئًا. We did not teach him poetry. Because if he knew poetry, he would have learned it from us. Because he didn't learn anything from anyone else other than Allah. His only source of knowledge was Allah Himself. So Allah says, مَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ شَيْئًا. We did not teach him poetry. Then Allah says, وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. And it was not befitting him. It was not appropriate for him. Meaning it wasn't fit for him to be a poet. It wasn't fit for him to engage in poetry. إِنْبَغَى يَنْبَغِي. يَنْبَغِي in the Arabic language, in classical Arabic, it means when something just isn't right. It's not appropriate. It just can't happen. So it's not right for him to be a poet. Poetry is not befitting him. It's not appropriate to him. What does this exactly mean? So this is where I was referencing Surah Al-Shu'ara. In Surah Al-Shu'ara, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us 3 problems with poetry, or poets. 3 issues or problems. This is not to condemn poetry in general, mind you. No. This is when comparing poetry to divine revelation, which I'm pretty sure nobody argues. Nobody in their right mind would compare poetry, a believer would not compare poetry to divine revelation, to Quran. That is what I'm talking about addressing. Not condemning poetry. I mean, some of the greatest thinkers and minds and scholars of this ummah have been poets as well. And their collections of poetry they contain a lot of wisdom, a lot of benefits. They basically would be doing tafseer of the Quran, sharh of the hadith, and they would just have it in prose, in poetry. Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah was a poet. Hassan ibn Thabit, companion of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, was a poet. Hassan al-Basri and all these great scholars, they were all poets. They have like poetry recorded of them. Great scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim would write poetry. And even in modern day times, we have great Islamic thinkers who have passed, and great thinkers, amazing ideas, amazing thoughts, and they were poets. I mean, the poetry of Iqbal, if you read it, is very profound wisdom. So it's not condemning poetry in general. Rather, it's talking about when you compare poetry to divine revelation, what you end up coming to the conclusion of. So there's three issues with poetry. The first one that the Quran points out is poetry and poets are more concerned with style, the adoration of people, how people perceive their poetry, how it's critiqued, what the critics have to say about it, how many stars did it get. It's entertainment. It's a type of art. Where it was put on display, how much it was recorded, how much it was sold, how many stars did it receive from the critics, how much applause did it receive. That's the first thing they're concerned with. Divine revelation and prophets and messengers, they're more concerned with substance. What's the message? What's the point? And they're more concerned with living up to what they're presenting, rather than just presenting something that draws the admiration or the adoration of people. The second problem with poetry that can be found is it can contradict itself. It can contradict itself. It can say one thing and then just turn around and make a contradiction in the next sentence or the next line. But the Quran, you cannot find contradiction in it. The Quran itself issues this challenge. You can't find contradiction within the Quran. It's impossible. You can't. So this is the second point. The third thing about poetry that the Quran points out is that people who usually become obsessed with poets and their work and poetry tend to be people lacking a little more purpose in life. People who become obsessed with this stuff. And a lot, not everybody, but a lot of the people who follow their poetry very, very closely tend to be people who kind of lack some purpose in life, don't really know what they're doing. And they're like in our times, when you talk about, because the poets of today in Western society and in Western culture, a lot of the singers and performing artists and musicians, basically a lot of them are poets. And the people who obsess over them and follow over them and follow their work and hang on every single little word that they say tend to be people who really don't have much purpose in life. They don't have anything better to be doing. They even call them stoners and things like that. These are the type of people that follow this type of entertainment and this line of thinking. So the Quran is presenting this idea, whereas divine revelation, prophets and messengers, their followers and the people who follow them and hang on every single word that they have to say tend to be people of great intelligence, great purpose, great status, and great contributions to humanity and society and community. So you see the stark difference in the poetry versus the divine revelation in terms of substance. You see the difference in terms of the outcome of it as well. And contradictions versus no contradictions at all. And then finally you even see a stark difference in terms of who it affects. It affects younger people. Poetry affects younger people. People who haven't figured themselves out, don't really have a lot of purpose in life. And if you even, like 20 years later, if you go back and look at what you used to read and what you used to obsess over and listen to, you'd probably laugh at yourself. You'd probably be embarrassed to admit what you were into 20 years ago. And that's just the nature of it. But versus that divine revelation, prophetic wisdom, subhanAllah, it affects the greatest of minds and the greatest of people. And the people who usually excel in this area are the most intelligent, the creme de la creme of any given society, community. And so these are a few very, very stark differences. And so that's why Allah says, وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. Poetry and being a poet was not befitting him. He's a messenger. That's so much more greater. That's so much more important. It's so much more profound. And subhanAllah, for the same reason, the Prophet ﷺ had a certain level of dislike for kind of forcing things, pushing things. To once again, that obsession. It's got to sound cool. It has to sound like poetry. It's got to rhyme. He was against this. The Prophet ﷺ, when we read some of his supplications and ahadith, you'll sometimes notice it sounds very poetic. It's almost kind of rhyming. The famous hadith of Bukhari, كلمتان حبيبتان إلى الرحمن خفيفتان على اللسان ثقيلتان في الميزان سبحان الله وبحمده سبحان الله العظيم. Now if you heard me read that, that sounded very poetic. It sounded very beautiful, like it rhymed. But you know what though? This was just natural. The Prophet ﷺ didn't try to do this. He wouldn't sit there and think it up. He would just speak and it came out like this. That's just how amazing he was. But the Prophet ﷺ condemned as-saj'a fi du'a. He condemned to sit there and try to make up du'as and supplication where they rhyme. And to forcefully sit and do it. And to kind of push the issue and make it happen. He said it's not a good habit. It's not a good thing. Be sincere. Substance is what matters. Allah's not going to accept your dua just because it rhymed a little bit better. And you were sitting there making dua with your notes in your hand, making sure that it rhymes. What adds acceptability to your prayers? What will add acceptance to your prayers? The more you humble yourself. Literally, the word tadarru' almost means to grovel. Grovel before Allah. Humble yourself before Allah. Shed tears before Allah. Show sincerity before Allah. If you are so overcome with the greatness of Allah and His power and His magnificence, you are so humble before Allah that while making dua, you can't even put together a coherent sentence. You're too busy choking over your own cries, stumbling over yourself, crying, and that's how you're making dua where you don't even make sense. You can't even put together a complete sentence. That prayer is a lot more accepted in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by evidence of the Quran than somebody who prepared this very elaborate, beautiful, long, nice supplication. He's reading it off of a piece of paper. And it rhymes. Every single line, the end of it rhymes. So the Prophet ﷺ condemned this practice. He said this is not a good habit. Don't fall into the habit of these things. So the Prophet ﷺ, this was not befitting him. He was we over here in this masjid actually a few months ago we had the khatib workshop as well. We were doing a workshop on how to give khutbahs, and so we had young brothers attending from all over the country. And that was one thing I also imparted to them there. I was trying to explain this point to them as well, that when talking to people, even when giving da'wah, when giving a message, when talking to people, don't worry so much about constructing your sentences perfectly. Like you have a script, like a teleprompter. You're not a politician. Don't read off a teleprompter. When talking to people, when giving da'wah to people, when giving khutbah to people, let that sincerity pour out. Pour your heart out to people. That makes a bigger difference. If you stumbled over a few sentences, you're spitting and, saliva's flying in different directions, but you're sincere, you're pouring your heart and your soul out, and you're sincerely communicating to people, that'll hit home a lot harder than your very well prepared, President of the United States style teleprompter speech. That'll be a lot more effective. The words that come from the heart. So dua is no different. So that's what's being said. The Prophet ﷺ is a da'i before and above everything else. وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, مَا عَلَّمْنَهُ الشِّعْرَ. We did not teach him poetry. وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. Nor was it befitting him. That's not appropriate to the Prophet of Allah. Now Allah says, so if it's not poetry, and it's not even fitting for him to be interested in poetry, then what was the Prophet ﷺ carrying? What was he delivering to people? What was he communicating to mankind? إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. It is nothing but dhikr, reminder. It's nothing but a reminder, dhikrun. And that's why it's in the common form. It's a reminder of many, many things. It's a very profound reminder, and it reminds of many, many different things. For instance, it reminds people of the reality of life, their purpose in life. It reminds people of fitrah, their true innate nature. What are they naturally inclined to? The Quran reminds people of the history of mankind, the history of humanity. What's happened with the prophets who passed before? What happened with the people who followed the prophets from before? What happened with the people who denied, refused, rejected the prophets and the messengers that came before you? And it also reminds people of the outcome, the consequences of their decisions, their choices, their actions, both in this life and in the life of the hereafter. So the Quran is a reminder. The Quran is a reminder. You know, when talking about the realities of life, I actually saw it in the news earlier today, and it kind of came up in our conversation earlier today, that, you know, there was, the article came out, the new book being published by Stephen Hawking. And he's basically talking about how, you know, the existence of this world and human life and the universe and the solar system and the galaxy and Earth and moon and sun, the existence of all these things in and of themselves are evidence against the concept of God and the concept of a higher being. Which is, subhanAllah, it's the complete opposite of what the Quran says. Quran says these things are the proof and the evidence for the existence of Allah and His power and His greatness. And he's making the complete opposite argument. And something jumped out. It was actually, I can't even take credit for this. I can't even sit here and take credit for it. In the article itself, it talked about some other academics, some of his other colleagues, professors at other great institutions of learning, who are very, very seriously disagreeing with some of his findings. They're very seriously disagreeing with his findings in his latest book. And one of them said something very, very profound. He said because he's obsessed with the question of how. He's obsessed with the question how. How did this come into existence? How is the earth, you know, moving about, and gravity, and human life, and plant life, and he's obsessed with the how. But he says he's never asked himself the question why. And he said he can't answer the question. His book, as fantastic and as great as it might be, does not answer the question why. And if he was to ask himself the question why does this world exist? Why do human beings on this planet exist? Why is there gravity? Why is the earth going around the sun? Why is this galaxy in place in the universe and the planets and the stars and the moon and the sun? If he was to ask the question why, he can never come to the conclusions that he came to. And that reminder is right here in the Quran. Because the Quran turns your attention to the sky and the sun and the moon and the ocean and the earth and plant life and human life. The Quran turns your attention there and then tells you to come to what realization from there. Why? Why? أَفَلَا يَشْكُرُونَ. And we come to that maqam of shukr. That gratitude, gratefulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we talked about. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ. This is nothing but a reminder. وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. And a very, very clear, self-evident Qur'an. This is one of the attributes that Allah gives to the Qur'an, within the Qur'an. He calls it Mubin. And the word Mubin has repeated itself throughout the surah and has been used in very powerful ways. The message of the prophets was called Mubin. The disbelievers who were refuting the message of the prophets and were calling the messengers liars, they also said, oh, in antum illa fi dhalalin mubin. Oh, you're completely in open air and open misgivings and misguidance. The word Mubin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even used it when talking about shaitan. He's your open enemy, self-evident enemy. And here Allah is saying the Quran is also Mubin. Quran is self-evident. It proves itself. It doesn't need any great philosopher or any great lecturer or thinker or some great tafsir lecture. No. The Quran proves itself. It's clear as day. And subhanAllah, the word Mubin can have two meanings. It can not only mean that in and of itself, it can not only be intransitive, that the Quran itself is clear. It can also be transitive, that the Quran clarifies. The Quran is a clarifying force. You know, just like when you have your glasses. You have glasses. And if your glasses get fogged up, or they get stained, or they get something on them, you can't see through them. You're driving your car and your windshield's covered with some mud or dirt, and you can't see through it. What do? You turn on the wiper blades. You take your glasses and you put some cleaning solution on them and you scrub them up. And what does that end up doing? That makes it clear. Now you can see everything. That's what the Quran does. We have a lot of confusion, a lot of distractions, a lot of things going on inside of us, around us, with us, to us. Lots of things are going on. Quran is that clarifying force. It brings clarity. You read the Quran, you understand the Quran, you live the Quran. You bring it into your life. Bring it into your life. Build a relationship with the Quran. The Quran will just make everything clear as day. Everything will start making sense. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. This Quran, it is nothing but a reminder, and it is a clarifying It is a clear Quran. Self-evident, clear in and of itself, and it clarifies everything else for humanity. And one thing other that I think it's important to point out, I talked about this yesterday, I just want to point it out again. Remember, the word dhikr means reminder, remembrance. That's not new information. That's something you already know. I'm just reminding you. When you have an appointment at 7 a.m. and your phone goes off at 6:30, you already know you have an appointment at 7 a.m. It's not giving you new information. It's just reminding you of something you already knew that you might have kind of lost focus about. You might have forgotten it a little bit. That's what it is. So that's the other thing about the Quran. The Quran's not like, introducing some crazy new idea. No, no, no. This is ingrained within us. This is all around us. It's reality. It's about as real as it gets. And the Quran is just reminding you of that reality. And then in ayah number 70, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ayah number 69, He says, مَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. We didn't teach him poetry, and poetry is not appropriate for him. He's not a poet. The Quran is not poetry, and he's not a poet. Then what is the Quran, and who is the messenger? If the Quran is not poetry, and the messenger is not a poet, then what is the Quran? What's the reality of the Quran, and what's the reality of the messenger? What's he about? Who is he? Well, the answer of what is the Quran has already been answered. It's a reminder, and it's very, very clear. But what about the messenger? If the messenger is not a poet, then what is he? Who is he? What's his job? If his job not to entertain me and tell me cool like poetry and make everything rhyme, then what is his job? What does he do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers that in ayah number 70, لِيُنذِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا. لِيُنذِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا. His job, his purpose, his job description is to warn. Remember, I explained the meaning of this word indhar. Indhar means to warn somebody of an imminent danger out of concern for that person. So somebody you know, somebody you care about, somebody who you would not like to see get hurt, is walking, and he's walking straight towards a ditch, looking in another direction. When you say, hey, watch out, watch out, watch out, slow down. There's a ditch, don't fall in there. You're doing this because you don't want to see this person get hurt. And it's a real danger. He was just 2 steps away from falling in a ditch. That's called idhar. So the Prophet's job is to warn people of the imminent danger that they are in, and he's only warning them because he loves them, he cares about them. He doesn't see them get hurt. But Allah says, لِيُنذِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا. So his job is to remind, so that he may remind, he may warn the one who is alive. مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا. The one who is alive. Now, if you think about that, that sounds obvious. What's the point of that? Of course, you don't go and remind dead people. You don't go and warn dead people. They're dead. No, it's not speaking about physically living people. It's talking about spiritually living people. People whose hearts are still alive. They still have some decency. They still have some sensibility. They still have some humanity left in them. Like the beginning of the surah said what? سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. It's equal. It doesn't make a difference whether you warn them or you don't warn them. These people are not going to believe. But then on the other hand, it said, إِنَّمَا تُنذِرُ مَنِ اتَّبَعَ الذِّكْرَ. Rather, you will warn the person who will follow the reminder. Who will listen and obey and follow the reminder. وَخَشْيَ الرَّحْمَنَ بِالْغَيْبِ. And he fears Allah in absence, when he's not around people. That's the same thing being reiterated here as a conclusion. That was the introduction. This is the conclusion. That the messenger has been sent to warn people, warn that person who is alive. Who's still somewhat alive. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in a very, very beautiful, profound way, other places in the Quran. For instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Fatir, He says, وَمَا أَنْتَ بِمُسْمِعٍ مَنْ فِي الْقُبُورِ. That you cannot make those people who are in their graves, people who are in the graves, you can't make them hear. That doesn't just mean physically, it also means metaphorically, spiritually speaking. Somebody who's just lost all humanity, lost all decency, his heart has just completely gotten covered with darkness, you can't make that person understand. You can't make that person hear. He's gone. So لِيُنذِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا وَيَحِقَّ الْقَوْلُ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. And al-qawl. Al-qawl I explained in the beginning of the surah. Al-qawl means the decision from Allah. The word, the verdict, the decision from Allah. So what decision is this talking about? I mentioned in the beginning of the surah when shaitan When Shaitan had that confrontation, he disobeyed and was defiant to Allah. And he said that I will lead most of them astray. I will lead most of them astray. So at that time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Shaitan that لَأَمْلَأَنَّ جَهَنَّمَ مِنْكَ وَمِمَّنْ تَبِعَكَ مِنْهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. That I will fill up the hellfire, I will fill up Jahannam with you and anyone who follows you, all together, all of you, I'll put you all into Jahannam. Allah had said, I'll fill Jahannam up with you guys. That decision, that decree of Allah, يَحِقَّ الْقَوْلِ, so that it comes to pass, it becomes reality, it occurs upon those who are ungrateful to Allah. Remember we talked about shukr. The word kafirin can mean disbelievers here, but the root, the core of the word means to be ungrateful to Allah. It's the opposite of shukr. Those who are ungrateful to Allah, those who are living and breathing and eating and sleeping and drinking and walking and talking and friends and family, and they're enjoying all the blessings, all the pleasures, all the blessings that Allah has given to them. And they look all around them and they see the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all around them. But that does not lead them to the realization of being grateful to Allah. And that gratefulness leads them to obedience. Well, those people, they are committing the ultimate kufr. They're being ungrateful to Allah. And the greatest, the epitome of ingratitude, being ungrateful, is to disbelieve in Allah. So Allah says that, مَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ, we did not teach him poetry, وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ, nor was that befitting him. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ, rather the Quran is not poetry. What is it? It is nothing but a reminder, وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ, and a self-evident proof, and a very clarifying force, the Quran. And what is the job of the messenger if he's not a poet? لِيُنْذِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا, so that he may warn that person who is still alive. His heart has still some life in it, some spiritual life. وَيَحِقَّ الْقَوْلُ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ, and so that Allah's decision and His decree and His verdict may come to pass upon those who are ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That the Prophet delivers his message to everybody. Somebody listens, understands, accepts and lives it, that's the one whose heart is alive. The one who refuses it, rejects it and denies it, and doesn't want to listen to what he has to say, well, you know what he's doing? He's just building evidence and proof. He's building a case against himself. He's building a case against himself. So when he stands before Allah on the Day of Judgment and says, I never got the message, he won't be able to say that. Because 4, 5, 6 ayahs ago, we already read that Allah says what? الْيَوْمَ نَخْتِمُ عَلَىٰ أَفْوَاهِهِمْ وَتُكَلِّمُنَا أَيْدِيهِمْ وَتَشْهَدُ أَرْجُلُهُمْ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. He'll stand before Allah. Allah will say, why didn't you believe? I didn't get the message. Nobody told me. Nobody explained this stuff to me. At that time, Allah will seal his mouth, and his hands and his legs will speak out against him and say, he's lying. The message was given to him. The messenger spoke to him. The Quran was presented to him. The truth was there for him to take. But he denied it, knowingly, willingly. So today, he's built a case against himself. Inshallah, we'll go ahead and stop here. We'll continue from ayah number 71 tomorrow, inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka.